Welcome back to another episode of Space This Week. We have another crazy week of spaceflight to discuss, from the ever-busy happenings at Starbase as SpaceX prepares for Starship Flight 5, to a staggering 3 Falcon 9 launches, one of them unfortunately coming to a fiery end. Blue Origin carried 6 crew to the edge of space on NS-26, Space Perspective's Neptune tourist craft was spotted at Port Canaveral for testing, China launched 6 satellites from an ocean platform, NASA's SLS program was hit with another colossal price tag, this time involving Block 1B's launch tower, Starliner faced more troubles aboard the ISS after Butch Wilmore discovered the craft to be creating some strange noises, Europa Clipper had its massive solar arrays installed and tested, and much more. Enjoy. SpaceX are charging ahead with readying Starbase for Starship Integrated Flight Test 5, which will of course see them attempt to catch the Super Heavy first stage out of the sky using the launch tower's metal arms, which we often lovingly refer to as Mechazilla or the chopsticks. Despite the fact that the arms have been used for years at this point for stacking operations, SpaceX feel that in order to withstand a catch, additional reinforcements will be needed. Specifically, we've seen the addition of reinforcement plates, also known as doublers, over the vertical support beam weld joints to hopefully make them more resilient to the force of a landing Super Heavy. Starship Gazer captured a pretty great shot of several cranes and cherry pickers swarming the launch pad to undertake these improvements. We've also seen lots of brackets installed along the catch rails themselves. In last week's episode, I covered our first view of an almost completed Starship V2. Ship 33 was lifted onto the welding table, ready to be joined to its aft section, and it looks like this work is now complete. Lab Padre captured this view of it being moved over to Megabay 2's central work stand. Although the view is somewhat obstructed by the bay's door, it definitely looks like the vehicle is now in one piece. Long before the age of Starship V2 and Starship V1, there was Starhopper, the first ever vehicle to fly under the power of the Raptor engine, and a staple of the Starbase skyline ever since. It's been rather precariously sat next to the orbital launch pad, but it looks like SpaceX are wanting to move it to a safer region. Hopefully, for preservation's sake perhaps. Its metal exterior was cut to install new lift attachment points, potentially signalling an upcoming relocation. Incidentally, last week marked the 5-year anniversary of its 150-meter flight test. We'll learn more as the days unfold, I'm sure, so hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any updates on this. Tower number 2 is seeing continued work after it recently reached full height. Workers were seen installing the chopstick stops near the tower's base. This metal protrusion is what the chopstick carriage rests on when at its lowest spot. After a streak of 267 successful Falcon 9 first stage landings, unfortunately SpaceX have had to set the counter back to 0 after last Wednesday's Falcon 9 Starlink launch. The mission, by all accounts, was largely successful. The rocket lifted off from Cape Canaveral Launch Complex 40, carrying 21 Starlink satellites to Shell 6. The satellites reached their destination successfully, and so if this were any other rocket launch, it would have been a roaring success. But of course, SpaceX reused their first stage boosters, and this time, the first stage, B-1062, sadly toppled over upon landing on the shortfall of Gravitas drone ship, meeting an explosive end. Now, while sad, SpaceX certainly got their money's worth from this booster. This was its 23rd flight, and also happened to be the first ever booster to fly 23 missions, the pack leader. The current new leader is B-1061, which most recently launched on the 12th of August on its 22nd launch. Do you think this one will make it to 25? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Greg Scott captured some rather sad photographs of the wreckage entering port, covered by an ITAR-safe protective blanket. Rest in pieces, B-1062, you magnificent beast. The FAA was quick to launch an investigation and grounded Falcon 9, but after 2 days lifted this, as because the cargo and launch pad were never at risk, SpaceX could return to flight operations, while the overall investigation into the B-1062 loss continued. As such, SpaceX got right back to work. We saw 2 Falcon 9 launches launch within 1 hour and a half of each other on the 31st of August. One launched at 7:43 Universal Time at Cape Canaveral, while the other launched at 8:48 Universal Time from Vandenberg. Both rockets carried 21 Starlink satellites to orbit, and both rockets made successful landings of their first stages, the Floridian launch landing on the Just Read the Instructions drone ship, and the Californian launch landing on the Of Course I Still Love You drone ship. Love 'em or hate 'em, Blue Origin is the only launcher that reuses first stages. albeit only launching the payload to a suborbital trajectory. And last week they were back in action, launching their New Shepard 26 mission to an apogee of 105 kilometers with 6 passengers on board, and made some notable accomplishments. Firstly, passenger Carson Kitchen became the youngest woman to cross the Kármán line at 21 years old, and crew member Rob Furl was the first NASA-funded researcher flying aboard New Shepard, and he performed experiments that studied the change of gene expression in one type of plant when exposed to microgravity, and during other phases of the rocket's flight. The mission was a success, with the 6 crew members successfully landing in the RSS First Step spacecraft at Blue Origin's Corn Ranch. While on the subject of Blue Origin, they recently shared this photo of them recently completing the first major mate operation on New Glenn's massive first stage, merging the aft with the mid module. New Glenn's maiden flight is still scheduled for no earlier than the 13th of October, and I can't wait to see it. Space Perspective's Neptune capsule could be considered somewhat similar to Blue Origin's New Shepard. It'll carry private crew to the edge of space via a high-altitude balloon on a rather luxuriously kitted-out capsule that can accommodate 8 crew and 1 captain. Although its 30-kilometer apogee falls 70 kilometers short of the Kármán line, it'll still offer spectacular views, and last week we saw the arrival of the first capsule to Florida's Port Canaveral for testing. It wasn't just the capsule though, we also spotted the Voyager ship, which will serve as a launch and recovery platform. Me personally, I'd love to fly on this thing, it looks amazing. So, if you own Space Perspective and want to send a YouTuber to space, hit me up, or whatever. Cool. Last Thursday saw China launch the third Ceres 1S rocket, which carried 6 satellites from the C platform off the coast of Shandong province in its mission dubbed How Far I'll Go. The 6 satellites serve varied purposes operated by Chinese state institutions and were all successfully delivered to their target 535-kilometer sun-synchronous orbits. I know NASA's Space Launch System has something of a reputation for being very, very expensive, but this latest news really takes the cake. NASA had commissioned a new launch tower that could support the larger SLS Block 1B rocket, which the current tower used in Artemis 1 can't do. The contract was handed to Bechtel Engineering at a cost of $383 million and delivery by March 2023. We're obviously well past that date now, and the tower is nowhere near close to being done, and the cost has now ballooned to a staggering estimated $2.7 billion. With a B. This sounds like an absolutely ludicrous amount, and people have been quick to draw attention to the fact that this is nearly double the cost of the Burj Khalifa, the world's tallest structure that cost a mere $1.5 billion. Now, even if you account for the fact that the mobile tower is a highly specialist piece of engineering and the fact that workforce exploitation was employed for the Burj Khalifa's construction, this still seems like an absolutely preposterous figure. All of this plus the fact it won't be ready until at least 2027. I feel sorry for my American taxpayer viewers to see NASA's budget being shot like this, and I do hope something can be done about NASA's cost plus contracting so that they have more control in how much things end up costing. Hey, speaking of inflated budgets, Boeing Starliner has had another whoopsie while docked to the International Space Station. On Saturday, Butch Wilmore noticed a strange sonar-like pulse coming from one of the speakers on board the spacecraft. He radioed mission control before holding his microphone up to the speaker, broadcasting the noise back down to Earth. And this is it.
Yeah, I'll do it one more time, and I'll let y'all scratch your heads and see if you can figure out what's going on. Here we go.
Detecting multiple Leviathan class life forms in the region.
Alright, I couldn't resist adding the Subnautica reference at the end, but yeah, very weird and very interesting. The audio was captured by meteorologist Rob Dale, which was then shared by Ars Technica. While probably nothing and likely not even worthy of coverage if this was happening in a tried and true vehicle like Crew Dragon or Soyuz, it's funny that in its final days of being docked in orbit, Starliner has to throw up yet another anomaly, even if this one likely isn't detrimental to its functions. I covered last week that NASA had made the decision that it would bring back Butch and Sunny to Earth on Crew 9's Crew Dragon spacecraft and bring Starliner back autonomously. Right now, the departure date for Starliner is set for this Friday, though who knows if this latest incident will delay it again. I would say that's extremely unlikely though. Speaking of Crew 9, we now know who the 2 axed crew members are. It was originally planned to fly with 3 NASA astronauts and 1 Roscosmos cosmonaut, but now that 2 extra seats are needed for Butch and Sunny, 2 of the crew will need to be taken off the flight. And we now know those crew members to be NASA astronauts Zena Cardman and Stephanie Wilson, leaving NASA's Nick Hague and Roscosmos' Alexander Gorbanov. The latter was never really in any danger of being de-rostered due to NASA's crew rotation agreements with Roscosmos. Hague was likely chosen over his contemporaries due to having previous spaceflight experience, unlike the original commander Zena Cardman, and even though Stephanie Wilson has 3 spaceflights under her belt, as mission specialist it's likely her role was seen as more expendable than Hague's role as pilot. Big news for NASA's largest upcoming interplanetary mission now. Europa Clipper is currently preparing for launch, and on the 23rd of August, NASA captured this 24-hour time-lapse condensed down to just a couple of minutes, showcasing the installation and test of the spacecraft's enormous solar arrays, which need to be big as the spacecraft will be heading to Jupiter, 5 times further from the Sun as Earth, in order to see if the moon Europa harbours life beneath its icy shell within its subsurface water oceans. The spacecraft gets its name from the fact that, rather than simply orbit Europa, it will clip past the moon on 44 close flybys from a highly elliptical Jupiter orbit in order to avoid overexposure to the intensely radioactive environment that is Europa's location, thanks to Jupiter's magnetosphere. Lowne Aerospace was back in business last Saturday. I dusted off the old Blunderbird's cap and embarked on an ambitious mission to recover 2 Kerbals from a Juno outpost, as well as upgrade said Juno outpost with new solar panels and science equipment, and also repair a stranded rover over 60 kilometers away from the base. Whew, it was certainly a mission, but a super fun one to execute. If it sounds like a good watch, then check it out, it's one of the boxes on screen. And of course, huge thanks to my Patreon supporters who help make all of this content possible. The names are on the left there. But that is the end of the video, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.